Quarterbacks, a commit, and Joel Klatt. We've got a decent 60 minutes awaiting all of you all for Iowa Hawkeyes Live, 146th edition. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, leave those comments and questions. We appreciate the contributions as well. Corey Braddock here from the Hawkeye of the Storm, as he is each and every week. Corey, how you doing today?
I'm all right. It's good to see you. Mid-May now, and off-season's flying by. I said that a couple of days ago, and Hawkeye Nation was rocked yesterday with news about Lisa Bluter, Iowa women's basketball head coach. So that changed the game a little bit, and there's just always stuff to talk about. We got a recent football commit to chat about today, and did we talk since? I don't think we've talked since Brendan Sullivan committed. I think he committed the day after we were on the air last week. So it feels like old news, but we've really not discussed it and the impact of it here. So it should be a fun one.
Yes, I checked in on the big breaking news live stream, and you were right next to my stove while I was making some type of dinner for 10 or 15 minutes. I just kept you rolling. I didn't know what was being discussed exactly, but
I appreciate that, Mark. I want everybody to know, and hopefully you can relate to this. Sometimes those spontaneous live streams are the hardest to do because you feel the need to give a voice to everybody and get on the air as soon as possible. But like, I hadn't digested what it meant for the program and for recruiting and all this stuff. And that's what people want to know. How does this impact this? How does this impact that? And it's funny, by the time I had gone on the air, Iowa had already announced that assistant coach Jan Jensen would be taking over for Lisa Bluter. So anyways, it's not always ideal to come at people unexpectedly during the middle of a day on a weekday, but I'm glad we were able to hit the airwaves, and best wishes to Lisa Bluter. She's been a class act and has obviously helped to bring a lot of success to the program and has made Iowa, you could argue right now, the most talked about Iowa women's basketball program in the country.
And in the business we're in, typically we don't have that next name. And that's what usually throws me off guard is I just get the breaking news. I jump on as soon as possible. And I am more old school, like we take these things in order. Let's discuss the tenure of the previous head coach, the failings, the accomplishments, all that. And people just want right out of the gate, what's your top 5 candidates list? We want to know who's going to be the next head coach. Oh, I don't know. I don't think like that.
Exact same thing that happened when it was announced that Brian Ferentz wouldn't be returning, when Ken O'Keefe announced he was leaving. So thankfully these things don't happen every day. Lisa Bluter has been at Iowa for it's been like 24 years or something. So like, it's not often that you have a 24-year head coach that steps away.
I think you have another one on your hands, don't you?
You got another one on your hands, and they also have a 10-plus year, let's see, like 13-year men's basketball coach. That got brought up yesterday. It's a fair point. That would be a great topic for a video, the longevity and just the stability with Iowa's, you could argue, the 3 biggest sports, men's and women's basketball, football, and frankly, wrestling. Tom Brands has been around for a long, long time now. And there's been, it's not like everybody's perfectly happy. It's not like those programs are just dominating the world, but there has been a lot of success. I mean, talk about going out on top for Lisa Bluter. I mean, give her credit. Not many people get to do that, Mark. And I brought up Hayden Fry as an excellent example, totally different set of circumstances. But Lisa Bluter's coming off 2 national championship game runs. Very unfortunate that they weren't able to win one of those games, but it is what it is. I mean, you can't go out much more successful than that. And I'm happy for her. And a lot of people make the mistake of sticking around too long. And I do wonder, not to turn this into a discussion of women's basketball again, but I do wonder if Caitlin moving on and you pair that with Lisa's age, the fact that Jan Jensen is such a sought-after assistant coach, if those two are so close, had she not made the decision now, would Jan ever get a chance at Iowa to be the head coach? Along with NIL and the portal, which I'm sure Lisa doesn't love. So it is, I mean, NIL has become more of a factor in women's sports than people realize, that people that don't follow the sport. And so I understand it. And I think it's going to be intriguing to see what Jan does with a really healthy crop of young talent coming in this year and then in 25.
Correction, my friend. You don't necessarily have an opportunity or are called upon to cover these stories very often if you're covering Iowa athletics, number one, or
True.
number two, if you're not covering all of college football all the time.
So do you go, I mean, I should know this, but do you go live after every major head coach firing or retirement?
I attempt to, but right after the season, of course, there's like 4 or 5 in one day. So you can only, the certain coaches.
That's from a business standpoint, that's the
Yeah.
only disappointing thing about how yesterday was handled, right? Because although they're not the easiest of live streams, you'd like to be able to milk it a little bit to where you can have a show about Lisa Bluter stepping down, and then in a week or two have a show about Jan Jensen taking over. But I can understand why Iowa did it the way they did with recruiting, with the portal, all that. I get it.
And all the shows in between about the speculation.
Absolutely. Yeah. 100%.
No speculation surrounding Drew McPhearson's safety out of Illinois at 6'1", 190, a top 100 safety in the country. What do we know about Mr. McPhearson?
Should be an exciting prospect. He played for a power in the Chicago area. The Loyola Ramblers, Loyola Academy is a two straight time, I guess I should say. They're two-time defending champions in the Class 8A title, I should say, for the state of Illinois. Really good athletes, played a lot of offense. I don't know how much defense the kids played, and I had a conversation with Drew yet. Hope to get him on the show here at some point. But most of his tape, if you go and look at Huddle, you're going to see a lot of snaps as a running back, a lot of snaps lining up out in the slot. He's not big enough to be a tight end, but he is kind of tall for a back, and he kind of reminds me of a smaller tight end the way he runs. Really crisp route runner, not the fastest, not the quickest. Appears to have good hands, but I don't think he's quick enough, fast enough. Does he have good enough hips to play corner at Iowa? I doubt all of that. I just think just speed standpoint, he's a natural safety, and that sounds like that's what Phil Parker and Iowa envisions him as. So, again, there's a little bit more diversity with the DB position or safety position with Iowa and the cash now, running more 4-2-5 than back in the day with the traditional 4-3 ruling the roost. So who knows where he'll end up, but my guess is he's going to be a little bit of a project, not because he's not got a lot of upside, just because he hasn't got a lot of defensive snaps under his belt. And it sounds like most of the schools that were recruiting him, Mark, wanted him as an offensive player. And he didn't have a lot of other high major offers. In fact, he didn't have any other high major offers unless you're counting MAC schools or Army. He had FCS, MAC, and Army. So I guess I know people criticize that sometimes. We all know that Iowa does a really good job at identifying diamonds in the rough. And I'll say what I've said many a time in the past. If you're going to put confidence in a 0-star kid, or I think he's now rated as a 3-star, according to most sites since his commitment, if you're going to put trust in Iowa's offering a kid like that a scholarship, do it when it involves Phil Parker. And in this case, they see him as a DB. Phil obviously sees something he likes as a future safety. And would I be surprised at all if he ends up being a great one at Iowa? No. In fact, Iowa's got an opportunity to have a really good safety out of Chicago this year. I should say not safety, DB. John Nestor's likely going to be a corner. They got to get him on the field, though. I've heard nothing but good things about John Nestor. They already are utilizing Sebastian Castro, another Chicago native. So seems like that DB pipeline out of the metropolitan area in Chicago is running deeper and deeper every year.
Sometimes I'm criticized in recruiting conversations for being a bit of a stars or rating snob. But to your point, I also trust if there's a track record with that particular program, head coach, coaching staff, and certainly Iowa, it would be interesting to go back and look at all their impact defensive players to see how many guys have had an offer sheet similar to what we're looking at with McPhearson, or maybe even if they've had some Power 5 offers, they haven't been from the likes of the elites. And certainly they saw what they were looking for. They knew that they could develop it. They, in fact, did so and turned the player into, one of the best at his position in the Big Ten.
I think to narrow that down a little more specifically, and it would take some time, but, settle on a recruiting site platform and then look at as far as if you want to just draw a line in the sand and say guys that end up starting at least one full season, okay, we're going to look at everybody who started at least one full season. What percentage of 0 to 3 stars, or you could say guys with no other Power 5 offers end up being a starter? What are those percentages, those numbers in comparison to guys who have other offers? I mean, I would assume it's not going to be on even level with guys who had a bunch of other. I mean, not everybody's swinging and missing is, I guess, my point. So, but yeah, I agree with that. And it's easy to bring up anecdotal evidence, examples. We brought up Josie Jewell the other day. Seth Benson's another great one. George Kittle's another great one. Now, maybe those guys had some Power 5 offers, but they were not highly touted. Jack Campbell's another one, didn't have many offers out there. But there are other examples. Brendan Diaz-Fernandez. He was one I remember when they recruited Brendan and got his commitment. First of all, I like Brendan a lot. Really nice kid. I'm frustrated by the fact that he graduated this last weekend, which is great to see him see out his academic career at Iowa. He's now transferring to Central Michigan. But he's a kid who didn't really have any other offers of note at all. Like, I don't even know if he had MAC offers. I had to go back and look at his recruiting list. I think he had like Lindenwood College or something. And I remember when Phil Parker offered him, I'm like, huh? But he was plagued by injuries. He worked his way onto the 2 deep at a couple different points in his career. So I don't think you can use that as evidence against Phil Parker's philosophy and the science that goes into recruiting. Now, if throw it to the other side of the spectrum with the offense, we've brought up Dayton Howard a number of times. This is his second year in the program, so he's got time. It's not like the clock is ticking real fast on him, but he had no other Power 5 offers, FBS offers, FCS offers, D2, D3, NAIA, nothing. Dayton Howard reported no other college football offers. So he's a receiver. So I'm not asking people to have faith in that. It will be intriguing to see if Iowa can get him to a point where he meets expectation. But absolutely, it's always it's not an exact science. I think Kirk and Phil would tell you that, but there's reason to believe in Phil's philosophy.
I came across a video. No, let me correct myself. I did not come across it. A viewer sent me a video a couple months ago where somebody out there that does a college football channel that I've never heard of did an outstanding job of going through the numbers of recruiting and turning those recruits and the star rankings into NFL draft selections and NFL players. It was an outstanding look at various numbers and putting them into context. It's something like 60 times more likely that a 5-star will reach the NFL than a 4-star. But if you look at the numbers on the surface, people don't think that. But once you process how many 4-stars there are versus how many 5-stars, that's how much this slides down. You guys in Iowa, you live in a bubble. You live somewhere else in regards to recruiting and development. And it's impressive. I say that as a compliment.
We do, but Iowa's also not getting 5 stars. Like, you get a 5-star once every few years, maybe.
They typically flip, don't they?
Well, yeah, they don't get a lot of 3 stars. They don't get a lot of 4 stars.
I'm referring to our buddy Cade Proctor there.
Yeah, no, they don't get a lot of 4 stars, Mark. And I would be curious to look at. It's hard because you have such a larger number of 3 stars on the Iowa roster and past rosters than you would even 4-star recruits. But I mean, I could name off the top of my head. I could give you some 4-star kids that never saw the field at Iowa. And frankly, there have been some guys. I mean, injuries are a part of football. There have been guys who have been 5 stars that have been plagued with injury and have never panned out at Iowa. I'd have to go back a ways, but they are out there.
We've had Tom Luganbill on a couple times, the ESPN recruiting analyst and color analyst on the college games, and he firmly believes that if a 5-star does not start in college, that was their decision, that they just simply did not have the work ethic or did not apply themselves. So with McPhearson, yes, helped his team to a state title as a junior, 855 yards rushing, 500 receiving, 11 total touchdowns. And again, they won a state championship in his junior season.
Real quick, can you read Doc P's, not his most recent comment, but the comment before? Am I misreading what he has to say here? What is he saying in this comment?
Brent's was a that went to, is that Kansas State? Kent State. Kansas State, after a couple of years, did well down there, but left here after year 2.
What is he? He was a what? What are we? Blank. He's a 4-star. Okay. I'm like, I read that as a, I got you.
Oh, yeah. I did too. That's how I read it too.
I'm glad
he was calling him an expletive. Yeah.
I thought it was an expletive as well. He's right. Julius Brents was a 2nd-round draft pick this year for Kansas State. Remember, he played, his first 2-3 years at Iowa and started very young, was long, really good grab. And I don't know what happened, why he got passed up at Iowa. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that somebody, I don't even remember who passed him by, but I can't imagine whoever that was better than a future 2nd-round draft pick. He's with the Indianapolis Colts. I'll be anxious to follow his career.
I am anxious, Corey, to hear your thoughts on McNamara and Sullivan, because now that Sullivan has been signed, I've had people ask me, and I'm sure 50 times more people have asked you about your opinion of the quarterback situation. I believe on one of our shows the other day, somebody asked me, one of our Hawkeye faithfuls, I forget who, whether this is going to be a true quarterback battle. I thought that was a good question. And I thought, okay, well, on one hand, I certainly believe that it should be. I believe just we're starting from scratch. We're going to August camp, and it's a quarterback battle. And I would throw Marco Lyonez in there, unless maybe he performed at such a place during the spring that puts him just at such a disadvantage. That I understand. But between the two veteran quarterbacks who have both proven themselves to a certain extent as Big Ten quarterbacks, I would just declare it dead even, go to it. Something tells me that Kirk Ferentz believes and positions Cade McNamara as the starter, and he hasn't necessarily lost his job, and therefore it's going to take a monumental effort for Brendan Sullivan to unseat him.
Who said that?
I'm just conjecturing.
Okay, you're conjecturing. By the way, real quick, the Rook in the chat, Cooper DeJean passed Brents. Okay, if that's true, I'd have to go back and I don't remember that. But if that's true, remember there are 2 cornerbacks on the field at all times. So if you have Cooper DeJean, who's a 2nd-round draft pick, and a future 2nd-round draft pick in Brents, you're probably going to put them both on each side of the field and make that work. Anyways, I digress. As it relates to Brendan Sullivan and Cade McNamara, here's what I don't understand, Mark. I don't understand anybody that wants to argue that there should not be a competition and that this is Cade's job. Like, we had people, we talked about last week, we had people on the channel making comments like, why do they need another quarterback? Now, I hope that's almost tongue in cheek. But yeah, I agree with you. Brendan Sullivan does not have the high-end experience that Cade McNamara does. But honestly, when you factor in the significant dip in talent level that Sullivan was, playing with at Northwestern compared to what Cade played with at Michigan when healthy, okay, that moves the 2 candidates closer together, you would assume. And then you also talk about the fragility that seems to be in place with Cade McNamara. He's struggled to stay healthy. He hasn't played a full season in 3 years. Like, upside wise, I think Brendan Sullivan, I think it's hard for me to say he's got a better arm. I think he's got much better legs. And that's not just because of Cade McNamara's injury. That's just what I see when I go back and watch those 2 guys healthy playing against Big Ten defenses. Sullivan's not Lamar Jackson or Michael Vick, but the dude's got some good wheels. I compared him to CJ Beathard. And for comparison, you go back and listen to my thoughts when Cade McNamara initially committed to Iowa. Mark, I compared his wheels to Jake Rudock. And that's not an insult to Cade McNamara, but who was more mobile? Who was more effective on the ground, Jake Rudock or CJ Beathard? CJ was. Maybe not by a landslide. Jake was good at scrambling and could pick up first downs. But CJ was more of a natural runner, and I think that's what, again, not a ton of tape to look at, but enough. I mean, the kid threw 90-some passes, I think, during his career at Northwestern. He was on the field a lot. I was
199.
He threw 199 passes. Okay, that was a lot more than I thought. So yeah, I guess my point is, assuming Cade stays healthy, it should still be an open competition. And I echo what you said. It should be a 3 quarterback competition. And hopefully, even though I know this isn't the Kirk Ferentz style, it's a 4 quarterback competition with James Rezar, because he's going to be here next month and he's got wheels and upside. I know we keep hearing how hard it is to learn the offense. Well, this is a different offense. And I would think, I have confidence in this, that it's safe to say Tim Lester is a better teacher. I mean, just naturally, because he played the position. He's got a lot more experience than Brian Ferentz ever did. So even if the offense is just as hard to learn as Brian Ferentz's offense, I would have to think Tim Lester can more quickly get a quarterback up to speed. And my guess is it's not. Like, if you asked, that's one question I look forward to asking Tim at Media Day. I'm not gonna try to put his foot in his mouth, but I want to know what he would say as it relates to learning curve. How long do you expect it to take for a high school quarterback to come into your program, come into your offense, and learn the offense to an adequate degree? You never stop learning, but when do you become adequate? Brian Ferentz was quoted in the past as saying it would take a year to year and a half, maybe more. That's insane. And Don Patterson has said as much. So I would hope that Tim Lester would, be able to look at James Rezar and say, okay, maybe it's going to be tough to get him up to speed this fall, but he should absolutely be in competition next spring and heading into the fall. Whereas in the past, it's felt like it's going to take at least 2 to 3 years for a guy to earn an opportunity at starting.
Kirk Ferentz is a smart guy, and he knows 50,000 times more about football and coaching and teaching football, especially, than I do. I wonder if it's ever struck him, if it's ever crossed his mind when he has answered the media or initiated a conversation with the media talking about how difficult it is to learn the offense, the irony in that, in how ineffective the offense has been. Like, usually you would expect like one of the best offenses in the country to say, it's difficult to learn this offense.
Yeah. It is one of the many ironic things about the situation at Iowa. Absolutely. By the way, the comment here from Isaac says, look at the stats. Sullivan gets sacked so much, has no pocket awareness. Well, first of all, I don't need to look at the stats to tell me if he has pocket awareness or not. Because you know what a big part of sack numbers is, Mark? It's how you're holding up front. I know that sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but what has Northwestern's line been like? I really don't know. What has their offensive line been like the last 2 years, Mark? I'm guessing it's probably been bottom third of the Big Ten in general.
So, say, man, did I watch any Northwestern football up until their bowl game last year? They obviously performed much better last year. They were so much better than they were previously, but they had a couple really good players up front. They had a situation the previous years when they were really awful, those 1-11 seasons, they were almost a microcosm, even worse than Iowa. Can't think of the tackle's name, who was a first-round pick in the NFL draft, but the rest of the line was shoddy and awful, almost like a Tyler Linderbaum type situation.
Yeah, Ralph says that Northwestern has had a very good O-line, in all caps, for the last 5 years. I don't buy that.
5 years? No.
For a second, I don't buy that.
And the other thing to consider in this, Corey, is that Cade McNamara's one full season at Michigan, his offensive line won the Joe Moore Award as the best offensive line in college football. And I just verified the stats. They by far had the #1 rushing attack in the Big Ten. They were dominant up front.
Who's this?
Michigan.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole point of this conversation. We're comparing Brendan Sullivan to Cade McNamara, expectations. I'm just saying, what did Cade McNamara show us last year that would give us any reason to think he's ultra pocket aware? Like, he got sacked way too much and made some questionable decisions. Now, granted, he was dinged up, but all of this has to be taken into account. I'm looking at just so people are aware. I'm looking at 2023 rushing numbers in the Big Ten. Do you want to guess where Northwestern ranked as it relates to? This is just one facet of offensive line play, and of course, running back play is a factor. But where did they rank as it relates to running the football last year? Where they finished what, 8-4, 8-5,
8-5,
8-5. Where do you think they ranked in the Big Ten?
14 teams in the Big Ten. They ranked 11th.
They ranked 13 out of 14. So don't give me this malarkey about the offensive line being very good over the last 5 years. They ranked second to last, well below Iowa, averaged 102 rush yards per game, 2.8 yards per rush. So, and they rush the ball a lot. Right? It's not like they're just running this pass-heavy offense. They rush the ball 458 times.
And they didn't face two of the four best defenses in the league in Ohio State and Michigan.
Correct. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert about Northwestern, but they exceeded expectations last year. I'm not saying that's due to Sullivan, as you can see in the board there. Played in 8 games, did have a good completion percentage and a solid touchdown interception ratio, but I think it's fair to say that offense, one of the primary issues with most offenses, typically, we could say the same about Iowa, is they're not good up front. They're not good enough up front. We keep hearing that. It all starts up front. We all, for years, have heard that Iowa's some offensive line factory. That's largely not true. And, maybe Sullivan will come here and that will be a problem. But I tell you what, Mark, who else had, I can tell you somebody who had worse pocket awareness than Brendan Sullivan, and I can say that without even watching much Brendan Sullivan tape. That's Deacon Hill. All right, that's Spencer Petras. Each of Iowa's last 2 guys, starting quarterbacks, have had as bad a pocket awareness as I've ever seen. Mark. By the way, did you see Spencer Petras won the starting job at Utah State?
I did.
How about that?
I will be after I review all the important games, top 25 games, of course, I will probably make it a habit to slide on over to the Utah State box score just to see what he's done. I bring this up just to see how Brendan Sullivan performed against quality competition. And again, I brought up the first set of statistics because in 195 passes, that's a pretty good sample size over 2 seasons. And assuming that 75% of those throws were against Big Ten teams, Big Ten defenses, he completed almost 69% of his throws. That's pretty impressive.
Compare that to recent Iowa quarterbacks. Just compare it to any of these recent Iowa. Even Nate Stanley. I remember for years people complaining about Nate Stanley's abhorrent completion percentage. Now, I think did it go up in 2019 to maybe close to 60%? But I mean, just the numbers from Sullivan last year for, a Northwestern team that, again, exceeded expectations, but talent-wise, I don't think anybody can argue that he had a lot around him. I would not be shocked if he wins the job, Mark. I would not be shocked. Because here's the other part about this. If just kind of going off history with how Kirk operates, not even Tim Lester, but how Kirk operates with injuries. People say, well, you don't lose your job due to injury. Okay, maybe not directly, but you can lose your job if you miss out on valuable time in practice and in camp. So last year, Cade McNamara missed out on a lot of time. He didn't have anybody behind him. When he went down at Kids Day, there wasn't nobody pushing him. So when he got 75% or 65%, whatever he was by game 1, that was still better than what they had behind him. The idea with sending Brendan Sullivan into this program is that, hey, even if Cade's 100%, it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion. Certainly, if he's less than 100%, I don't see them going with him, assuming Sullivan doesn't just completely tank based on what we know about him. So, and the other part about this is if Cade gets hurt in week 2 of fall camp and misses 2 to 3 weeks, I can't imagine, even if he's 100% by week 1, if Sullivan's been taking all the snaps with the reps and has looked good, or at least moderate, my guess is they go with Sullivan. I mean, and he could get hurt too. Like, there's no guarantees here, but we know the history with Cade McNamara. We know the injury history with Cade.
In Big Ten play, if he put up these kind of numbers as an Iowa quarterback with their defense and special teams, I'm pretty impressed that the first time he ever stepped on the field in college against Wisconsin, he went 11 of 17 through a touchdown pass, no picks. Then the next week he comes back against a good Maryland team, 18 of 24, did throw a couple picks in that game. 23 of 30 against Iowa, played Ohio State in a windstorm. That was the week that you were at Purdue, and there was wind all over the Midwest, and went 10 for 14 against the Buckeyes, and then 9 of 11 against Minnesota. And then we see just about 4 meaningful games in which he had a number of throws, and really the Nebraska game was his worst game statistically of his career. I can't rank it having watched it, although I did actually watch some of that game. I can't recollect what he looked like, but 12 of 23 with a pick. But then he finishes last season 16 of 23 against a pretty good Maryland team, 265, 2 touchdowns, and then against Iowa, 12 of 19 with a touchdown pass.
81 yards.
Yeah,
81 yards that's against Iowa, though. That's against Iowa, and
yes, they're tackling.
Here's what I look at in those numbers. I look at going through those 2 years that you have up. Go back to 2022, second career game. It was at his first start, because did he come in relief work against Wisconsin the week prior? So I'm assuming maybe Maryland was his first career start. He runs for 53 yards.
Yeah.
And then you scroll down to the game at Ohio State. He runs for 55 yards.
Yeah.
And then you scroll down to, game against Maryland in 23, runs for 56 yards. Those, again, when's the last time Iowa's had a quarterback that's even been in the positives? I would guess that, that would be a great stat to go find. When's the last time Iowa's had a quarterback with positive rushing yards? Maybe it's not as extreme as I would think it was, but
well, if a particular quarterback on any given day didn't get sacked and then he had a 3-yard run, but how about a 50-yard game?
That's not, yeah. But I'm just saying, like, how often do Iowa quarterbacks not get sacked regularly? And I mean, I'm just saying, and in general, with Spencer Petras, Deacon Hill, and even a hobbled Cade McNamara, the only positive rush yards they were getting were off QB sneaks. I'm just saying, that's a reality. I think you're gonna actually, it wouldn't be hard to do that. Do you want me to do that real quick, Mark? Let's look up Deacon. I'll do this real quick. Deacon Hill. Anybody want to guess his stats as far as rushing stats just last year? Maybe it's not as extreme as I thought. By the way, have you heard anything about Deacon Hill's recruitment?
No.
So he's still out there. He's still on the table for somebody. So Deacon Hill, as far as rushing yards, let's see, 2020. Give me a game log here. All right, 23 game log for Deacon Hill. Rushing yards, 0. Well, 0-0. The first 2 he didn't really play much. Didn't play against Penn State very much. Okay, let's jump to Purdue when we'll go to Michigan State because he threw 27 passes against Michigan State. -3 rushing yards against Michigan State, -25 against Purdue, -18 against Wisconsin, -22 against Minnesota, -7 against Northwestern, -4 against Rutgers, -14 against Illinois, 10 against Nebraska, -16 against Michigan, -20 against Tennessee. I rest my case. Iowa had one game last year where they had positive rushing yards from the quarterback, and that was against Nebraska.
Do you want to hear Spencer Petras from 2022?
No. Well,
South Dakota State, -25. Iowa State, 1. Nevada, -16. Rutgers, -13. Michigan, -31. Illinois, -10. Ohio State, -7. Northwestern, 1 yard. Purdue, -19. Wisconsin, -41. Minnesota, -14. Nebraska, -8 for a -294 for the season.
So give me what's his average per game rushing numbers?
294 divided by 13. About
294 divided by 13, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to at least 294 divided by 13. So let's throw out, I'm going to look at Deacon. So basically,
it's actually
negative,
12. 12
what's that?
games. I'm sorry, it's actually 12 games. I just assumed he played 13. But Petrus, that's right, he got hurt. He didn't play the bowl game.
294 divided by 12 is basically round up to 25. So negative 25 yards per game on the ground. Deacon Hill, shall we look at what Deacon Hill, his average was? Negative 126 divided by, what would that be? 12 games. He played in 12 games last year. Negative 11. So with Petrus and Deacon Hill, split the difference, you're looking at what, like 18? Am I right? Somewhere in there. Over the last couple of seasons, on average, Iowa's starting quarterbacks have averaged negative 18 rush yards per game. The reason I bring that up is, let me pull Brendan Sullivan's average up.
And if we added 2021, it would be about the same.
2021. Or for
Petrus is just about the same.
Yeah. Okay. So in general, let's go up to 20. Let's go over the last 3 years of average. We'll say on average, Iowa quarterbacks have averaged negative 20 rush yards per game. Now, Sullivan, if we just look at, well, I guess we could look at the last 2 years because we have both of them. 2023, he had 160 rush yards he really didn't play. Well, he really didn't play the first 4 games.
So about 8 games. So about 20 yards a game.
Oh, he only had 4 games played where he had 3 games in 2023 where he threw 4 attempts, 6 attempts, and 6 attempts respectively. I'm not going to include those. If you look at the games where he played full number of snaps, basically it's 150. We'll throw out Duke and Penn State. So you're looking at about 100 yards in 4 games. That's 25 yards per game. And then you go to 2022, and let's see his games where he played the majority of the game. He had 5 games where he played a lot, I should say, at least double-digit pass attempts, and he had 97 yards in 5 games. So that's about 20. So you're right there. My point in bringing this up is you go from negative 20 on average with Iowa, and that doesn't mean it's going to be apples to apples from Northwestern to Iowa. I would expect Iowa's offensive line to maybe be a little bit better with as experienced as it is, who the head coach is, etc. Knock on wood, we'll see. You go negative 20, negative 220. That's a 40-yard difference. That is very much noteworthy. And I mean, as far as rushing numbers, Mark, where would that have put Iowa last year? They in the league, Iowa averaged, let's see, rushing yards per game. Iowa averaged 116 rush yards per game, which put them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ninth in the Big Ten. It's actually better than you would expect. 9th in the Big Ten in rushing. But if you add those 40 yards, they're right there with Purdue at, well, no, I'm sorry. They're actually up there. They're hovering around the top 5 in the league in rush yards per game. Let me make sure I have this right. Yeah, they're right there in the top, but just with the 40-yard difference on the ground from quarterback play, potentially from Brendan Sullivan, you go from 116 to 56, which last year would have been right there with Minnesota, number 6 in the conference.
And of course, the position is attached to throwing the football. That's what we all think about, but it's about gaining yardage and moving the stick so you can score. And if you can get that extra 40 yards on the ground, then you get that extra 40 yards on the ground. And it's something that the defense has to account for.
Absolutely. And here's the deal. We keep talking about it. Marco Lainez, struggled or not with the arm, his athleticism, his upside with his legs is far better than Sullivan or McNamara. Not saying he's going to be able to come in there and play a full allotment of snaps this year as a redshirt freshman who has reportedly struggled in practice. However, there's another guy that if you can figure out some ways to get him on the field with possible run plays up your sleeve, you have another running back that has the ability to throw, and it gives you more versatility and more flexibility. We hope, as Iowa fans, that that's the freedom that Kirk Ferentz is granting to Tim Lester.
Okay, we've got about 5 minutes. I would love for us to comment because you had posted this. I just thought it was interesting. I have all the respect in the world for Joel Klatt. I believe you do as well. But he had posted this concerning the various atmospheres in the Big Ten. And Joel Klatt's top 5 atmospheres in the conference stand like that. Let me pull down this banner so we can see number 5. All right. So Joel Klatt, of course, knows his stuff and knows football on the field as well as anyone. But those are the top 5 Big Ten atmospheres. So when I think atmosphere, of course, number 1, I'm thinking about the volume of the crowd. How rabid is the crowd to make it difficult for the other team to hear signals and snaps and communicate, because you want to create a home field advantage. So I'm not thinking about he's rating tailgating at Big Ten stadiums.
Right.
It's more about the game atmosphere inside the stadium. And my only exception to this, first of all, Michigan, despite having the largest stadium in America, and they have for a long, long time, and as soon as Ohio State bumps theirs up, they continue to bump it up. And man, shoot, when I was 15 years old, those stadium rankings were number 1 and number 2, and they were in the low 90s. And now Michigan's up to like 112 and Ohio State's sitting around 111. So they just keep cramming people in these places. But Michigan's very much known as a wine and cheese kind of crowd. Like, it's not the most raucous stadium. That's not the reputation. Now, Michigan fans will tell you that the stadium is built in such a way that the noise rises out of the stadium and is not.
But that doesn't do it. Yeah, exactly. It's a big bowl. It's a big, wide bowl. But what does that do for? Well, again, assuming Joel Klatt is rating atmosphere as it affects gameplay, signal calling, etc. I'm not. I know there's some people who get really angry because whenever I say anything as a slide against Michigan, this ain't a slide against Michigan. It's a slide against Joel Klatt. But like, that's the sore thumb on this list. Are you kidding me? I'm assuming he just had Michigan in his top 5 because they hold so many people in the Big House. I'm assuming but to me, that's just almost a dumb thing to say, especially as a former Ohio State quarterback. Or excuse me, I'm confusing him and Herb Street. Former Buffalo quarterback, but he's a quarterback nonetheless who's called a lot of Big 12 games. Or Big 10 games. I'm surprised he's got Oregon and Washington. I just, like, every player that you ever hear from brings up Kinnick in that conversation. That's my only thing. I haven't been to all these stadiums. I've been to Outson. That's the only one I've actually been to, and partly due to proximity. I mean, all those other stadiums are quite a ways away from me. But like, in general, I can't imagine Iowa's not a tougher atmosphere to play in, especially when you have the testimony of so many players from past years. And Iowa's, again, they're built that way. I'm not saying it's just the fans. They don't have as many fans as a Michigan, but they're right on top of you. They're right on top of the field. And Iowa fans are passionate. Give them credit.
I also think he's being swayed by the strength of the teams. I think that's influencing him, I'm guessing. Also, I'm going to take exception with Washington. I would put Iowa not necessarily just at number 5. They would be in the top 5. I would consider them possibly higher than number 5, but I would displace Washington. So this is what I know about Washington. I've never been to Husky Stadium in Seattle, but when they're good and when there is a purpose for the fans to show up and pack it out and be raucous, they're there, and it's a difficult place to play. However, they're not going through 7-5 seasons like Iowa has and still showing up, and you really can't tell, okay, is this team 7-5 or are they 11-1? That is my experience with Washington. Again, not firsthand experience, but knowing from watching on television and knowing, okay, there's the stadium's half full. So they're not showing up when they're not good. So Iowa fans show up, and Wisconsin, they have a gripe here as well. And shoot, how about Nebraska? There's actually a few different candidates here.
Absolutely. Nebraska would have a say in this. How about Indiana?
Huh?
I'm just kidding, of course. But the Coliseum, if we're going to put Michigan there, then put the Coliseum on there. I mean, just because you hold a bunch of people and it's a storied program does not mean they're one of the best environments. I
Well,
think
Michigan,
Nebraska, absolutely.
I'm sorry, Michigan fills the stadium. USC fills their stadium when they're good. When they're not good,
Good. But
it's
that's
a fair
good.
weather fan base.
What's the difference between does Washington fill their stadium?
No, that was my point about Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
They do not.
Yeah, and Nebraska fills their stadium like no matter what. Now there's some controversy about how they've done that, but yeah. So I would again I feel bad really criticizing this, but my top based on what I have heard and seen on television, I would have to think Penn State's number 1. I would probably go with Ohio State at 2. I'd probably go with Iowa at 3. And I guess Oregon. I mean, I've it's been a while since I've been out there, and I hope to make it out there it's a great. I love Eugene. Like just the experience of being out for a football game in Eugene is awesome. And then I don't know for number 5. I think Nebraska. Honestly, I think I'd put Nebraska over Michigan and Washington, but maybe I'm just trying to ruffle the maize and blue.
You have been to Autzen Stadium?
I have one time, 2000. Let's see. We were on vacation out there, 2019. And for the record, I do have family out there. So when Iowa they don't get to go there this year, which is thank your lucky stars, because I think Oregon's maybe pretty darn good. I would love to go back out there. In fact, one of my favorite musicians played at the spring game. Matt Carney is from Eugene, and I heard he did a post-spring game concert. That would have been an awesome trip to take, but alas, some good. No question about it. I think this Pac-12 to Big Ten, almost what you call a merger, is it's going to bring some interesting environments and kickoff times and all that. Do you want to real quickly before we say goodbye to everybody, your reaction to a couple of the big noon kickoffs that were announced yesterday? One of which being Alabama and Wisconsin. I saw somebody in the Iowa realm kind of poking fun at Wisconsin, saying that poor student section, because they're kind of known for filling the student section really late. I know there was a tragedy there years ago, and that's allegedly why they have to bring in all the students single file in a certain way. I know when I went to the Iowa-Wisconsin game, and that game was like a late afternoon game, it took forever for that student section to fill, and that was a big game. So for an 11 a.m. kick, it'll be interesting to see what the student section looks like. But nevertheless, great Big Ten SEC game early.
I am just happy that Alabama is actually traveling to play an out-of-conference game because, number one, they went 10 or 12 years without traveling to anywhere except for an NFL stadium for a neutral site game. Didn't go anywhere else. And then they went to Austin, Texas 2 seasons ago. That was their first time traveling anywhere since they went to Penn State in 2011. So this is their first trip north since 2011 to take on Penn State.
Can Wisconsin beat them?
Sure, they can. It's maybe a 10 or 15%.
Okay. Has Alabama ever been on Big Noon Kickoff? Is that a dumb question?
They were on the Big Noon Kickoff against Texas 2 years ago in Austin.
Okay. That was a good game. That was correct me if I'm wrong, that was the Purdue guy.
Yes, Hudson Card had to play that game. Last second field goal. Bryce Young pulled off a miracle play, dodged a guy, ran like 50 yards to set him up for a field goal. Exactly. Folks, we got a Nebraska show. It's coming up in about a half hour, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 Central on the Nebraska channel. Join Justin Adams and company there. And Michigan Lives at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So it's a full slate here at the Voice of College Football. And, of course, Corey with everything Iowa on from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Anything in particular you need to highlight?
Oh, yes, Mark. I have to highlight this for you especially. Indiana Fever postgame tonight, approximately 9 p.m. Central Time. It's the regular season opening game. We may take a hit in viewership because a couple of Hawkeyes are playing for Las Vegas in the second half of the doubleheader on ESPN2. So I'm sure there'll be lots of Hawkeye fans that want to catch Kate Martin and Megan Gustafson, but I'll have a second screen up and we'll just kind of This is going to be a very informal show. We're just going to chat, and I'm sure some people will want to talk about Lisa Bluter and recruiting and all that again. But we'll get to see Caitlin for the first time in an actual game in about an hour over on ESPN2. So we'll be, myself and Kashin will be live at 9 p.m. Central Time for post-game coverage.
Awesome. This time next week, we will be able to discuss my program ranking for Iowa all time. I'm rolling out my program rankings all time for all the conferences, only the Big Ten to go. So check that out. Check out all the other conferences. And again, we will discuss Iowa if we have time next week, but in some coming show. Appreciate you all being here at Hawkeyes Live. Come on back next Tuesday at 4:30 Central. Join Corey tonight for Indiana Fever postgame.